Well, I'm really grateful that you joined today. We have, again, a very special guest, Vince Hawkins. This brother is someone I'm very excited to have a conversation with today. He is a wealth of knowledge and experience. And a couple things about Vince Hawkins. He currently serves as an evangelist in the St. Louis Church of Christ here in the Heartland. He's been in the ministry for 25 years. He actually got converted where I live here in Nebraska. Um, and that was, gosh, that was how long ago, Vince? You've been baptized for how long?
We're in 1991,
That was
February
a minute
22nd.
ago. You know what I mean? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that was a minute. I'm
yeah.
not going to tell you what I was doing during that time, but he's done ministry, all types of ministries, youth and family, campus ministry, obviously, singles, the AMS, which is back in the day, the art, media, and sports, marrieds. And the thing about Vince is he's a learner. You know, one of the things I really am encouraged by and challenged by is when you have very faithful people who have the experience and they just keep going back to get the knowledge. And so he graduated in 2019 with a master's in missional leadership. We're gonna get into that a little bit today. I'm really excited to create the conversation around that. I look forward to everyone knowing about that. And believe it or not, he is pursuing another master's degree, another graduate degree, and is going to be in conflict resolution. So we're going to get into that as well. Both of those things are going to lend very well in terms of the conversation about trauma and ministry and being in the church. So, Vince, welcome today, my brother.
It's good to be with you, Kyle. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on your program, man. It's good to see you, my brother.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let's get it, man.
Let's
Why don't
do
you
it.
tell us first a little bit about your conversion and then why you went into the ministry?
Well, I was converted. It's a good question. So I was, well, I grew up in the South, going to church, religious guy. I always tell people, sang in the choir, with the church on Sundays, things like that. And but being a college athlete, I knew I wasn't living even according to the things that my Sunday school teachers and my church were trying to teach me. And so anyway, I was at the University of Nebraska. I was reached out to a guy by the name of Aaron Breffert, good friend of mine, lived on the same dorm floor as me, invited me to a Bible talk, then invited me to church, and then invited me to study the Bible. And man, we started getting into the Bible and studying, and it just got pretty intense. And I had not ever read the Bible in that way, and I could tell pretty, after getting into the Bible, that there was somewhat of an expectation that I was going to be living this standard that they were calling me to, and that these guys were living that standard. So Kurt Simmons and Aaron Brefford studied the Bible with me very thoroughly and baptized me at Holmes Lake there in Lincoln, Nebraska, late in the evening. And it was truly, truly one of the great blessings of my life. Started me on an incredible journey, toward God. And I mean, yeah, I'd say maybe continuing the journey in a lot of ways, but I was converted. I became a true disciple of Jesus in Lincoln, Nebraska, when I had came to faith, repented, and was baptized. So yeah. So that's a little bit. That's a Reader's Digest version of my story study, my story. So
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Why'd you go into the ministry?
yeah, good question. I was really impacted by those guys, man. Kurt Simmons studying the Bible with me and how well they knew the Bible. And it just the spirit just moved, that I could tell that these guys, Kurt Simmons, Aaron Brefford, and really that campus ministry, that small church in Lincoln, they were about trying to help people become Christians. And it just hit me that there was nothing more important than helping people to know God. And I wanted to be able to do for others what those men did for me. And so studying the Bible with people. And so I was very intrigued by Kurt's lifestyle. Like, what do you do, man? And the number of Bible studies he was in, the people he got with, the discipling times, how he was available to be on campus with me and get time with me, how he had people in his homes, he'd have these meetings. I just thought, what a fascinating lifestyle. I would love to devote my life to doing nothing but helping people become Christians and helping people follow God. And I thought there can't be anything more impacting or anything more exciting. And of course, shortly after I became a Christian, he ended up moving from Lincoln to Cincinnati, where he was going to be leading a larger church and helping more people and things like that. So I was very, very impacted by that.
Well, I appreciate your service in the Heartland for so many years. You've been just a stability board, and just as a man who, when things get hard, I know I've called, and many people can call, and I think that some people their hearts get hard, and other people their hearts just get stronger. And I feel like yours has definitely been strengthened instead of hardened through all the things that most people, yeah, a lot of people they would just get hurt and shut down, and you've grown, and I think everyone can see it. Um, so with that, I don't know if that's a Midwest thing or whatever, but when people we're like a flyover region in a way.
Yeah.
I constantly talk to people either in other parts of the country, world, and Nebraska. So do you guys have no? Do you guys have power? Yes, we have power. um,
Indoor
we do
plumbing,
have cars.
power.
We definitely have phones. Anyway, I just think there's a culture because we have even in our small group several people who've moved from like New York or LA and they move here and it's such a culture shock. It's so different.
Yeah.
First of all, how would you explain for our worldwide listeners the difference in terms of like the heartland of America? Maybe just a couple of things. I know you could write a book on it, but what would be a couple of things that you could say to understanding Midwest culture?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool because I grew up in the South, of course, and so there certainly is a culture to the South. I think I'd say Midwest people are, I think they're genuine folks. I think a little bit like the South. I think people in the Midwest don't particularly, you know, enjoy being told what to do. I know in Missouri, it's the show me state, is what they refer to it as. And you got to show me. You can't just tell me. And I think Midwesterners, they are, yeah, they love. I'd say generally they love God. They want to do what's right. They want to do the right thing. Um, they, but they probably I'd say maybe a little bit private. Not so much like the people on the coast, perhaps, but people in the Midwest, they'll speak to you. They're kind, polite. I know in St. Louis, I say St. Louis is that place where everyone comes back to. People love living in the Midwest, and they may go away for a while, but they tend to come back. So those are some of the things that I don't know. Some of the things that impress me about the Midwest. I don't know about you, but yeah, I love it. It's a great balance, between the coasts. I think people in the Midwest, and frankly, most of mature people, they look at people on the coast and, they see them as a little different. They kind of like, you got problems because you live on the coast and I'm happy in the Midwest. You know what I mean? They like living here. And I think we're starting to see a flood of people coming back to the Midwest, even as things on the coast are complex. In particular, people are going to be able to work from home. I think we'll find more and more people moving back to the Midwest. But I'd say generally, probably conservative in a lot of ways. Probably not as conservative as the South, a different kind of conservatism in the Midwest, conservative folks. So, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And don't let that fool you, by the way. People in Nebraska are nice. But I mean, like anyone else, folks in Nebraska can be pushed and they will wrestle you to the ground and hurt you. You know? Yeah, I think, people probably in the Midwest, folks down south, they kind of smile and say, bless your heart. You push them to the limit, they'll hurt you. People in the Midwest, similarly. People on the coast, I think, tend to be maybe a little bit more edgy, you know. But people in the Midwest, don't let them fool you. Don't take their kindness for weakness. Nebraska nice it's a good thing, you know what I mean? it can be a bad thing too. So
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, it's again, if you move to just the Midwest region, you will notice a culture shift depending on where you come from, and that's especially from the South. You would I like that you brought up the South because some of my best friends live in the South, and
yeah,
they talk about how different it is. So
yeah,
it is different, and I think it's important we pay attention to that. I want to move to the next question.
sure,
So times are changing. And
yeah,
we have to adapt. I mean, when we look in
yeah,
the New Testament, even the language of Koine Greek is an adaptation to what would get God's word out fastest. Well, instead of Aramaic, let's do Greek. And I mean, you just see Paul continue to shift in his approach. If he's dealing with a Gentile, if he's dealing with a Jew, he's able to adapt
yeah,
constantly. And so,
yeah.
the gospel is able to morph so effectively if we understand it. What are some ways that you think that, especially after 2020, and just the way things are changing, what are some ways, and this probably leads into the missional leadership theory, but what are some ways that you think we're going to have to adapt to how things are changing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that, if there's a generation of people, baby boomers, you might say, and maybe even a little bit of Generation X. I mean, church was something you went to, right? You go to church, right? And I think we still kind of say that, hey, I'm going to church. I mean, obviously, and I think we know what we mean. We're going to the assembly to be with people, do not give up meeting together. I think there was a time when, if you build it, they will come was sort of very in vogue, right? You build these facilities, people come. And part of, my professor, Mark Love, in the Missional Leadership program, he would always say the days of if you build it, they will come are over and they probably will never return. In other words, we've got to go to the people. God is doing a new thing. And so, yeah, with the missional, leadership, part of it is we don't talk about, you know, um, we're on a mission. We're joining God's mission. God is on a mission. He has been on a mission since the creation of humanity. We either join that mission or we don't. And so I think we've got to see that we're joining in this thing that God is doing. And much like the first century church, they didn't really know what they were doing. They didn't really have incredible strategy. They were caught up in the spirit. They didn't know where it was coming from, the sounds, the wind blowing, everything going on. You can see Peter in Acts 9 and 10. He's just sort of traveling around waiting to be caught up and finds himself here, finds himself there, finds himself, with Cornelius, and just the spirit is moving and doing a new thing. And so sometimes maybe, we're a little too maybe we're a little too strategic. Maybe we're a little too, in our efforts to be very strategic, we don't make room for the spirit to do something new or to open up a way. And maybe God's showing us some different things. So I think, part of missional leadership is joining in God, just getting caught up in what God is doing. And that's tough, right? That's really difficult. So I think I have to balance that myself. I have to think about that because I mean, the organism still needs to be organized, right? You can't just we're just open the door and whatever happens, happens. I mean, we still have to have some strategy. But I think we have to do things in such a way that we're easily able to pivot, as you say, adapt. We've got to be willing to say, okay, well, the spirit's not blowing there. The spirit's moving us over here. Okay. And I think we got to be willing to do that. That's that adapting you're talking about. So, and that's frustrating. It's extremely difficult. We generally, but if you think about Abraham, that's what he did. God said, go. And you look at Abraham's past, and it was kind of like it was a much shorter route to get to where God wanted. God took him on this path and this wandering and all of this. We don't really like it that way. We like to go, okay, the fastest way to get there is here. I'm going that route. We don't, we don't have time. We don't make room. We're not willing for the spirit to interrupt us. We're not willing to do it a different way. In fact, when God tries to come in and take us on a different course or in life, even individually, Kyle. Like, God, that's not what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to do this with my life, and that's why I need to get. And God keeps smacking us in the head and saying, I want you to go left to then go right. Well, why not just go right? I mean, I want you to go left and then left, 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 and then I'll take you right and a backward. That's not how we operate as Westerners. That's not how we operate as Americans. And I think that's going to be one of the great challenges, I know for me, as we move forward.
Oh, I
So,
appreciate you saying that. That's so. Let me make sure I'm understanding, and then I want to ask a question. So, what I hear you to say with missional leadership, the thought behind it is that it's no longer kind of the idea of being the command center where we're going to have everyone come here, and then that's where we're going to build it from the stationary position. What I hear you saying is that God's already working, and we're going to
yeah,
join Him in what He's doing and what
yeah,
He's been doing,
yeah,
and it's no longer going to be the command center where we build the we build the place where God works. That's
yeah.
not where you say that God is calling us necessarily.
Well, I think we know that to be true anyway, right? I think the reason, the whole temple thing, God wasn't like, you know, I mean, Jesus goes, hey, tear down this temple, I'll rebuild again in 3 days. And they were like, oh, you can't tear down the temple. Jesus goes, what are you talking about? I mean, God put the spirit inside of us, not inside of buildings. We know that stuff. We know that to be true. And yet, we do put a lot of emphasis and, and this place and that place. And so, no, I believe that we definitely have to, as I'm looking at it, I think God wants us to re-empower, our small groups in our community. I think there's still space for God's people to come together on Sunday morning worship in large community. I think that's good. I think that meets a need. I don't think God's angry about that at all. But I do think a little bit of what church has become is kind of this big show, this big thing, this big presentation, this big that. I think, yeah, I don't think that's not necessarily what God needs to be effective. I think God can work with less. And we've seen God do that even in our fellowship. We've seen God work, in homes and parks and hotels, you know. And when I was in Lincoln, Nebraska, we met at a banqueting center. With Sunday morning, we come in there and we had to mop the floor multiple times because it smelled like a bar every Sunday. We're inviting people to church and we're inviting people essentially to a place that was a bar the night before. We were working hard just to get that alcohol smell out of there. But, God moved, God worked. And so I don't know that we've got to build some massive facility. I think our small groups are the key, to God doing amazing things in these small communities and neighborhoods. And I really do believe we have in place in our fellowship, for the most part, small groups. I just don't know that we've empowered them. And I don't know that they are understanding their part in the mission. So,
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. There's a, and I've said it on other podcasts, other episodes where you have this. There's this book called Oregon Trail Theology, and I look forward to diving into it more. But I like the initial premise, which is in every movement there's tension between the settlers and the pioneers. The
yeah,
pioneers want to go west. We're talking about frontier country. We have a very frontier culture, rugged
yeah,
individualistic culture here in the Midwest. And this, it's a lot of good work ethic, a lot of the salt of the earth culture. But then there's just this moment where then there's the settlers. The settlers create the tension because it makes it feel like dead weight to the pioneers. And so, but imagine that being in a movement. And then
yeah,
you have this war between the settlers and the pioneers, and it's a
yeah,
both and, which
yeah,
is part of my disagreement with the author a bit. His thing is that the millennials kind of had this settler mentality, and the builder generation, who's responsible for where our church sizes were, they're the pioneers. And so he's like, we got to get back to, and I'm like, well, it's a both and, because the pendulum swing is always going to create negative issues later. But in terms of trauma,
yeah,
trauma is something that cannot be healed in either extreme. If
Right.
you are settlers and then your trauma just kind of sits and you just navel gaze and you never get inspired, or you are pioneer and you never actually attend to those wounds, which it seems like a lot of ministers are really figuring out
Yeah.
what happened when we were growing, right? Because we didn't maybe
Yeah.
heal, we didn't really deal with certain things. And my email box now is full. I would say almost. I've got several people I've got to get back with church hurts from the way that that we thought we conceived pioneer,
Yeah.
what we used to think about it. And so when you look at mission, and it's like you have this amazing kind of mission, missional sort of thought, and then you've got conflict resolution.
Yeah.
Those two really kind of, to me, help with that like pioneer versus settler kind of. I think you're going to be an agent of change, and I think you're going to be very helpful for those of us that want to get back to pioneer, and others of us that want to sort of, well, we need to think, we need to kind of take care of the women and children or what. And so I just think if we just move for a moment to the conflict resolution,
Yeah.
what are some lessons or what are some needs that you think that conflict resolution really meets for us today?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, we are. So I think everyone is in conflict. I think we're all in conflict with God in some way or another. I think we're people, that I mean, God wants us to do certain things. As I said earlier, He wants us on a journey, and we resist God. God, that's not the path I want to go down. I mean, there are many people, we're resisting God, and we're because God didn't say it this way or write it in the sky or do it a certain way. We tend to want to be in conflict with God. We think we're in conflict with others. We're really in conflict with God in a lot of ways. And so, I know for sure that there is this overall tension between power and peace. And I think that, you know, in the Bible, Egypt represented power and Israel was supposed to represent peace. And I think that that's a struggle. We're either in one camp or the other. We're either seeking power in life or we're seeking peace. And power has to have slaves. It has to have, you know, servants. It has to have, you know, everything that comes along with power. It just, and you get caught up in that. And I think it's a struggle. And so God sends this Prince of Peace in Jesus, what I mean, who brings peace, but he also can bring war. And this Prince of Peace who is going to do things differently and turn everything upside down. And so I think that, you know, we as Christians got to ask ourselves, you know, what are we really after? Even as we look at building God's kingdom, are we building for power? Are we building to be a people of peace? I mean, what are we really after? What are we seeking? I mean, we want to be the big dogs, the biggest, the baddest. Why? Do we want power? Do we want control? What are we after? And by the way, this is not the absence of authority, because I think authority is different than power. I mean, authority is healthy, it's good, but this power hungry thing, it can be very, very damaging. What I mean? And so I think that it's a struggle. We're going to have to keep in the back of our mind that we really are people of peace. And as such, are we doing things that are we agents of peace in the world? Or are we trying to control one another? Are we kind of trying to control God? What I mean? Are we trying to control our journey, trying to control our kids? And we all want control, we want power. And so we battle constantly. We hold on to control, which is sometimes power is money. What I mean? So we hold on to that. We don't want to give it away. So it's a battle. I'm still trying to sort it all out for sure. I've not arrived, certainly, but I definitely see that there's an opportunity for us as disciples. And so, yes, we got to be peacemakers in this world. Our communities, our neighborhoods, there's every relationship. Our divorce rate is growing. You know, people need to know that someone can bring them, you know, this gospel of peace. They need to know that someone's going to introduce them to the Prince of Peace. They need to know there's people out there that are not going to shout them down and scream at them, even though they don't look like them and agree with them or vote like them or whatever. But they're people that we have we can actively listen and live in a diverse community where, you know, we don't all agree, but we don't major in minors or minor in majors. You know, we major in the majors. We let the minors be the minors. So I think, yeah, there's an opportunity for sure. But you know, I always say, I think sometimes well-intentioned people, you know, something happens and they run to social media, for example, and they're gonna throw a scripture out there to shut everything down. I'm just going, that's not gonna bring about peace. You know what I mean? You could put Jesus wept out there and someone's gonna, you know, try to interpret it, you know, negatively. So I think, yeah, you know, I like to say we should not run the fires with gasoline. As people of peace, we got to figure out how to run. If we're going to run through these fires, we run with cool water, cool heads, and able to really, you know, be a calming force and an agent of real change in our communities and our families, et cetera, et cetera. Bro, let me just say this. I don't know how I ended up here. This is not how I grew up. This is not who I am naturally. I and my I think God didn't make me the way I turned out. You know what I mean? I turned out to be a rather violent person, and I kind of like stirring up trouble and chaos. You know, and I think God's trying to get me back to who He intended me to be, and it's a journey that I'm on, and I'm enjoying it. But certainly there are moments where I don't want to be Nebraska nice, Vince nice, or anything. You know, I'm just like, do it one more time and watch what happens.
I fight that as well. One of the things that I don't share a lot with people, but being 6'10", I can't have the same type of overtures that other people have. You know, it just always looks bigger and more intimidating and menacing. And it just, to your point, you know, and I think that God has, oh man, I like that idea of how God kind of took that characteristic and is like, I want you to be a peacemaker. And we look in the Beatitudes, that's what He cherishes. He cherishes those who create
Right?
peace. I want to just say quickly, I really am grateful for the thought about conflict resolution skills because you've got trauma. Trauma is the inability to get conclusion. At the end of the day, it's when we don't have Sabbath on the inside and we can't get peace about the things that have happened. And so, until people can get all that trauma, you know, dealt with, which sometimes takes years, in the
Yeah.
meantime, we have to have skill. Sometimes it's not about will, it's about skill.
Hmm.
And in our church, we just started the conflict resolution classes
Yeah.
that you sent some of our people through. And my wife and I weren't able to do the first one, and I was really bummed about it. But we're going to absolutely be on the second rotation of that. Our
Yeah.
goal
I
is to
look
get an
forward to hearing.
entire church equipped and all of our small group leaders. And so everyone is going to have what we saw in the Jewish law. I mean, the Jewish law really mediated a lot of things. And so
Sure.
now in the new covenant, we don't have, you know, Talmudim and we don't have what they had. The
Yeah.
Spirit is really having to lead us. And so I think this conflict resolution is a skill
Yeah.
that isn't just, you know, in terms of fixing things, it's also preventative. I think a lot of resentment is prevention,
Yeah.
and you got to have the skills. And so I just appreciate your wisdom, and you've got years and years of ministry wisdom to say we need to figure out how to do conflict because we're clueless.
Well, I will say this. I wish I can take credit for it. How I got here is pretty miraculous. And I will say this, shout out to David Jung, who actually is the real brains behind this program. And I think that David is really the guy that has been a mentor for me. I've done a lot of training for me. I'm still learning a great deal for sure. And I could not agree with you more. There's no doubt about it that, conflict can be a beautiful thing. It really can be a very beautiful thing. You think about in our marriages, right? Conflict is necessary. Low levels of conflict are necessary for there to be great intimacy. Your intimacy builds when you have those little tense moments and you get through it. It's a beautiful thing. It's mismanaged, poorly managed, or unresolved conflict. That's the thing that we want to be able to tackle. And the longer it goes on, the more it feels like, oh, we're just never going to get this resolved. And the reality is, it's like, this too, that, you know, it's intrapersonal conflict, a lack of peace internally, so that when something happens externally, we can't respond but one way. We respond, you know, I don't know, centuries of anger or years of bitterness or whatever, because we're not at peace with God. We're not at peace with the journey He's got us on. So we're angry with God, and we're angry with this journey, and we're angry with others. Can't quite come to terms. Boy, when we get an intra peace, then the things on the outside, they tend to impact us less. And I think, but knowing our own triggers will really help us to be that much more effective and being able to be these agents of peace in the world. Because I tell you what, you can't be on God's mission and be out there in the community and out there in the world and dealing with people that have their own issues. They're going to trigger you. I mean, and if you're not at peace with God and you're out there on the mission, someone's going to throw something at you. And what are you going to do? I'm off the mission. I'm out. You know what I mean? People shouldn't be talking to me that way. You know what I mean? You're like, hey, it takes a little thick skin to join this mission God's on. Look at how thick God's skin had to be, how thick skinned Jesus had to be, the apostles, And so I don't know why we tend to think that if we're going to be on this mission, man, nobody's going to hurt my feelings. Nobody better not say nothing mean to me. People better, I'm like, come on. You know what I mean? Like, I want you to come to some internal peace. Because I'm telling you, what we got to get done, bro, it's intense. And the world, look around, it's like there's a lot of chaos.
Oh yeah, it's a dumpster fire in a lot of situations. Social media makes it worse,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So, and I appreciate you just kind of being a mediator. We need people who are willing to be a bit of a mediator in it all. Let me just say this: I very much appreciate you joining me today. You've got, if you were to give people kind of the 10,000-foot view of where you think things are going to be going. So you got a master's in missional leadership. You got another master's in conflict resolution. What are, like, if we kind of just go aerial view for a moment, what are you kind of hoping things evolve into?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if I'm really true to this journey I'm on, I really feel like, I mean, like I said, I plan to do this thing in conflict resolution. Some of it was because, hey, when I retire, this would be a nice little gig I can do. And then I get pulled, interrupted, and Moreski says, hey, you should do this missional thing. I'm going, that's not really what I want to do. I want to do this. And I do this, and I learned that, well, God's on this mission, and you got to you got to enjoy the journey. You've got to be willing to get caught up in the spirit. And I'm like, okay, all right, well, let's roll with it. And then I'm led back to this peace thing and this conflict thing. And I'm going, well, maybe I should do the conflict resolution thing, but not for money. Maybe there's an opportunity for me to do something. So I'm like, I wish I knew. What I can tell you is this, is that every step of the way, I feel like God's calling me to something different. And so I'll just tell you, I mean, I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, I'm working on this mediation thing in conflict. And I thought, well, maybe I should volunteer in my community and see if there's a group I can join. And I get connected with this group. And I talk to the gal on the phone. And she calls me up one day. She said, hey, Vince, um, that, the city of Ferguson is going to be in conversation with their police officers, because the DOJ has, pretty much, you know, um, the DOJ got involved in the Ferguson community thing. And it's not a court order, but it essentially is they're helping fund this. So we're going to be having community relationship talks where we'll be over Zoom. We'll talk to the police department and the community, and you can work at you can serve as a facilitator if you're willing to do that. And I'm thinking, sure, I'm happy to do that. And so I feel like we'll see what God has in store, But I think it's cool. I think there'll be lots of opportunities like this around the country, perhaps. Maybe that's a way I can serve in my community. Maybe not. But maybe there's opportunities in the church. So to answer your question, I don't know, I'm open. I want to stay interruptible. I still have in the back of my mind some things I'd like to do, but I'm open to what God may want me to do. And honestly, like you said, I got to be willing to pivot and adapt. And if I don't live a life that is interruptible and adaptable, then how am I ever going to be able to lead people in this new era that we're in? Which maybe it's not really that new anyway, because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Amen.
Yep.
Oh.
Absolutely. Bro, I appreciate you. A couple things I want to encourage you, and then I'm gonna send you on your way. I really feel like there's a couple guys in my life I can think of I've been Christian for about 20 years, that I say in the heartland that I would look to as an example, and you're one of them. A very short list. I love the culture here in the Midwest. It's definitely not for everyone. But I think that you're someone who has thrived in it. And I do think there's a certain humility and skillfulness in pacing that a person has to have be successful in sort of a Midwest environment. And it's an environment where people are very tribal. They've got their families, they've got their lives, they've got their lifestyles. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to puncture through that. And I think you've been a great example of just loving people while they hear God's voice. And I just want to say this as I say this to all my guests, that we are with you and God is for you, my brother.
Oh, Kyle, appreciate that. Brother, I have tremendous love and respect. Your growth it is unbelievable. It is as it's not even measurable. You say you're 6'10", but your growth has first far surpassed your wingspan and your height. And I am so proud of you, so proud of the man of God you are, so proud of the man of God you're becoming. I just could not be prouder of you. And it's my honor to be on your podcast. And say hello to your lovely wife. If you don't know, his wife, Christy, was my wife and I's flower girl in our wedding. And she
Yeah.
is the cutest thing in the world. She is precious. And I can't imagine her being with a better man than you, my brother.
I
And
appreciate
your
that.
son, how old is your son now?
He's almost 2.
He's 2. He's probably already taller than her, isn't he?
He's getting there, man. He's my son.
That's right. That's right.
I
Uh,
appreciate you, man.
I love you, brother.
I love you too. All right, for our listeners, thank you for hanging with us. If you've been with us the entire time, I want to thank you. Please like, share, and subscribe as you have been doing. The channel is growing. The podcast is growing. The blog stuff that I'm putting on my website is all growing. TrueTraumaTheology.com. You can email me at kyleSpears@TrueTraumaTheology.com. I love you guys, and thank you.